joining us is a man who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to Public Utility Minister Barry Padarath. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mikey, and good evening to those who are locked on.
Yes, well, this is the first time he's here as the Public Utilities Minister, so congratulations is in order. Congrats to you for being chosen to take up such a role. And I know it's not easy, quite challenging. You've made some comments about it already, some that have benefited many of the workers that fall in our utilities companies such as WASA and T&TEC. Tell me, what was the first thing that jumped out to you upon taking your role, your portfolio, and getting out there and getting started?
I think, Mikey, the main thing in the Ministry of Public Utilities that most people were expecting and looking forward to was job security. It was as though it was a proverbial noose around the neck of WASA workers in particular. The workers of WASA is about 5,000 strong, and they, being part of the PSA, campaigned with us on the general election hustings, but also they understood very much the issues that we were raising, particularly with respect to the Water and Sewerage Authority and T&TEC, in that we had telegraphed to the population that there would be no increase in electricity and water rates at this time until we can ensure that there's a proper service, a better and regular supply, there's proper management within the company, and that the workers who have built that company over the past 20, 30 years, they would be assured their jobs, not at the expense of this new management structure that the former PNM administration was advocating. So the PNM was advocating for a very top-heavy Water and Sewerage Authority, where you had these ballooned salaries, somewhere close to over $100,000 in some instances, and it would have been at the expense of sending workers home. So that was the main thing, I think, coming out of the general election that really jumped out at me with respect to this particular ministry. When I went to WASA, you know, the employees came out and they applauded the Prime Minister's decision to rescind the transformation plan of WASA under the People's National Movement. And I think it crossed all barriers in terms of who it impacted on. It was from the top management all the way to the janitors and the cleaners there. So they felt as though that, you know, their jobs, job security was something that the new administration really did deliver upon. It was my very first act in terms of bringing that cabinet note to rescind that transformation plan, which was very top-heavy in terms of management and political appointees at WASA, as opposed to looking out for the man and woman who spent a significant amount of years giving their blood, sweat, and tears towards the development of the company. I mean, the company is not perfect. We all know that there are challenges.
Yeah.
We know what the challenges are. But I think when you have a job force that understands that today or tomorrow they don't have to worry about where the next meal is going to come from with respect to their families and their children, and etc., that puts them in a better frame of mind to be more productive in the jobs that they're doing at WASA.
You know, earlier on we had the Minister of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development, Mr. Honorable Kennedy Sawat Singh on, and he spoke about a new economic framework, getting us out of this area of stagnation and getting out there and making sure that SMEs and other stakeholders are taken care of. And I want to take you back to the day that the Prime Minister, of course, took her oath of office. She said that it is going to be a vision for a strategic, inclusive, and forward-thinking administration. And she stressed her government's commitment to national transformation and long-term progress. Are there things that we are going to be seeing coming down the pipeline that is going to be totally different from the conventional ways that we've seen or haven't seen anything taking place for quite a while?
Most definitely. You talk about coming down the pipeline. I'm not so sure if there was any pun intended in that. But most definitely, you are going to see a shift in terms of a paradigm shift in the way in which things are approached, but also in terms of the operational element of it. what I found going into public utilities in particular is a very heavy ministry. Now CPEP has been added to the portfolio. So there are a number of critical areas in that ministry that impacts people every single day of their lives. Water, electricity, communication. These are things in people's homes that they utilize every single day. And in some instances, they don't have the service, they don't have the supply. And therefore you ask, what are the plans going forward? What is the vision? How do you operationalize some of the things that we had promised on the general election campaign? And I've broken it down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Particularly the focus has been on WASA with respect to this ministry in particular, because we learned from WASA themselves that 27% of the country received a 24/7 supply of water under the People's National Movement. In 2025, a country that has spent billions of dollars in this sector, it is shocking, it is alarming, but it really tells you that the government that was there before us, they did not have the political will to fix those problems at WASA. These are things that, as I said, impact people every single day of their lives. And with 27% of the country receiving a 24/7 supply of water, there obviously must be a difference in terms of what is the vision for the company, in terms of water production and water distribution. A lot of these challenges at WASA are not new challenges, but it really requires you to go into the boardroom and make sure that a lot of what you're being told is actually happening, and that the operational element of WASA is conducive in terms of delivering the results. So first and foremost is the issue of water production at WASA, because that is what everybody's on the tip of everybody's tongue. Inside of WASA, it is water production. Water production is just 50% of the problem. And therefore, if you have other alternative supplies of water in terms of additional wells, you are looking at desalinated water.
Right.
In specific constituencies like Maruga, Mayaro, Cyprus, which has perennial problems in terms of catchment areas, you then open up these retention ponds where when you have a lot of flooding, that surface water management can be captured somewhere so that it can then be transposed into water production into your taps. Those are the areas that we need to look at with respect to water production. But then the other half of the problem, which to me sometimes is a more critical part, is the water distribution. A lot of our means, a lot of our infrastructure of WASA, I know it because I represented a constituency called Princestown, and Princestown has one of the most challenging areas in terms of poor infrastructure, landslips, etc. And there are a lot of exposed WASA mains here. Those mains have not been changed out in the past 60 and 70 years. And a lot of WASA's failing infrastructure contributes significantly to the loss of potable water. And therefore, sometimes there's water in the lines, but it's not reaching where it's supposed to reach because of the issue of poor infrastructure, dilapidated infrastructure. And therefore, one of the first things I've done is that while we are focusing on creating new streams of water production, you also have to look at the area of distribution. And therefore, an audit of WASA is taking place in terms of WASA's assets. This country has a maintenance problem where we invest in new infrastructure, but there's no maintenance of that infrastructure. And that is not limited to any specific area. It also includes WASA and other areas of public utilities. So, as I said, half of the problem really is the water production, and the other half is water distribution. I've told you what is our short-term and long-term plans for water production, water distribution. I'll give you an anecdotal sentiment, Mikey.
Yeah.
For the past 4 years, the former administration accessed an IDB loan for the transformation of the water sector. They had that money in hand, so it is not an issue of money. It is not an issue of resources. It's an issue of political will to get the job done. And having held that money from the IDB for the last 4 years, very little was done in the water sector to utilize the resources that were available to you to change out the crumbling and dilapidated infrastructure, but also to invest in new sources of water. And therefore, it really raises the issue of political will. You have cash in hand. You know what the problems are. You know what are the projects that are needed to be done. but yet you sat on your hands and you did nothing for the last 4 years with that money and all those projects.
Mr. Padarath, I think that's what really has many people confused, because the People's Partnership led by the UNC at that time, it was water for all. I mean, gone were the days where you see blue barrels lining the sides of the roadways in many of the rural districts. We had people who were working, people who were managing the situation. Now today you're hearing so much reports that there were truck-borne water, and the mere fact, if you even mention geographical discrimination, some people become very defensive. I mean, how did we able to go backwards rather than move forward?
That's a very interesting question, and I'll tell you this. There was no investment in the water sector, whether it is for water production or water distribution. They sat on their hands looking to create jobs for the boys and girls in the People's National Movement. And that is why when we spoke about the management structure and these ballooned salaries, they focused a lot on cutting the workforce of WASA to make WASA profitable. And therefore they forgot there was the other element of that, which is to also make WASA operational so that it delivers water to 100% of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, in their effort to use WASA as a political vehicle for jobs for the boys and girls in the PNM, when you have a former general election candidate, not one, but two, in senior management positions that are brought on to run WASA without having the requisite background, the requisite formal education in terms of water resource management, wastewater, etc., then you understand why the company ended up in the way that it did, because it was not run efficiently for the purpose that it was set up for. They utilized it to give jobs to the boys and girls in the PNM with these huge ballooned inflated salaries, and that is why so much focus has always been on the transformation plan. And when you look at the transformation plan sets out very clearly. You'll recall it was not last year but the year before, when at the Standing Finance Committee I raised the issue that they did not budget $60 million in NIS government contribution to NIS for WASA. Right. And when I raised that, I said, Minister, does that then mean that WASA employees are going home? And he said, well, more than likely it is possible. Now, they danced around this entire issue for the past 2 to 3 years, holding that noose around the neck of WASA employees. And that is how they thought that they were going to make WASA efficient and so on. But you could not put square pegs in round holes and expect greater levels of production. But at the same time, while you had that going on, there was no investment into the industry. I'll tell you this, going into office for the past month, one of the things that I'm very surprised at, and I've shared this with the Prime Minister as well, is as though like ministers never used to go to work. I don't know what they were so busy doing. Because the thing about it is that while you are insulated in terms of running the state enterprises and so on, you must also provide the direction and the vision of what is your government's direction and vision to bring greater effect to public utility, social development, whatever it is. And when you go into these entities, and the staff are telling you, well, we never saw a minister. A minister never met with the staff. We don't know what is the government policy because they've never shared that, except to say that they're going to shut down WASA, they're going to shut down this and that, the other. And that was the approach, I think, that they took to governance, where they became so removed from the people, even the people that were working with them in ministries and state enterprises. And therefore, you spend all of your time, meaning the former administration, spent all of their time chasing shadows where none existed, instead of really getting down to doing the work. And that is why we have reached the situation that we are in, because they focused on what was the personal interest and the personal benefit, as opposed to making these companies profitable, making them operational so that it delivers on the mandate that is set out to do, in the case of WASA delivering water to people. And instead you invested in programs. I'll tell you, and I'm happy you spoke about those blue barrels, because I remember there was a headline about a year or two ago saying that Barry and Marvin clash over barrel and bucket. I could not imagine in the year 2025, with so many billions of dollars invested in the public utility sector, that the ministry still had something called the rain harvesting water program. And when I asked, what is this rain harvesting water program? It is essentially what you just described, about these buckets and barrels being put on the outside, and you're giving people buckets, barrels, and tanks, and you think that that is how you empower them. Those things may work for today and tomorrow. What then happens for the years to come? You still continue and expect that they will full rainwater from barrels and buckets all the days of their lives, and their children will carry on that? No, a responsible government will ensure that progress, that you see the tangible progress by developing, and that is why I've been speaking particularly about rural communities. While we invest in the infrastructure all over Trinidad and Tobago, from north to south across in Tobago, you also have to pay a special focus and emphasis on rural communities that have not had the opportunity to develop like other parts of the country that are more urban. And therefore, what then happens when these communities, they don't progress with the rest of the country, and they are just simply forgotten? And a lot of that happened in the 10 years, and that is why I spoke about the geographical discrimination. When I saw the WASA reports in terms of underserved areas in the country, it cannot be that one part of the country gets a 24/7 supply of water based on end, and then you have places like Mayaro, Maruga Tableland, Separia, Cedras, Point Fortin, and I think maybe that's why the people of Point Fortin voted them out, which came as a surprise to some. It wasn't a surprise to us, because people of Point Fortin, some of these heartland PNM, what was considered heartland PNM constituencies, voted them out.
You're right.
And a lot of that had to do with simple things like water. I remember being in opposition, and people would be calling every day, and can you help? Can you raise it? And they had sitting members of parliament who were in the government that never sought to assist in relieving some of these challenges.
You're right, because we got bombarded on the radio stations almost every day of some areas that haven't had water supply in quite a while. Now, you also mentioned, of course, that as far as CPEP, which falls under your purview, as using the program, the former government, as a slush fund to benefit senior party officials.
Yes. Well, I've also described it as political prostitution. Because why I say political prostitution, to best describe what happened at CPEP, is that they were utilizing the CPEP teams, threatening them to attend if they don't attend PNM meetings, that they will lose their jobs and so on. But also prostituting the program politically, so that they will have a stranglehold on the employees, one, the contractors being the other, because of the financial returns that they hoped, and in many instances I'm sure they received. Because when you hand select over 360 CPEP contractors, and when I went into CPEP, this information was not readily available to me. I subsequently had to speak with the staff and so on. And then they started to share what was going on there. They never saw a minister, but they received instructions via the phone, who to hire, who not to hire, who to fire, etc., etc. And a program meant to be a transition for out of that type of work into something more sustainable became a vehicle, a political vehicle to keep the People's National Movement in power for the past 10 years. And that is why I also described this program as a runaway horse. Because I saw former Minister Al-Rawi, who the people of San Fernando West voted out resoundingly, is all over the place talking about the way being salacious and dangerous and so on.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that we must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago what we found when we went in there. Because they used the resources of the state as though it was their personal resources. And that is why they're finding so much difficulty in disconnecting themselves from ministerial jobs, because they believe that this was their own personal kingdom. And I'll give you one anecdotal situation that I found in CPEP, and it really puts it into context of how they ran this country. They rented a building, and you know Mrs. Pisabis always speaks about his recusals.
Yeah.
They rented a building for CPEP that received cabinet approval, was never outfitted for 3 years and 5 months, was never The building was never outfitted, it was never occupied. But the rent kept flowing for 3 years and 5 months.
Wow.
At the tune of $85,000 a month, which comes up to about $3.6 million. And when we discovered who the building belonged to, it belongs to the family, very close family, of a former senior cabinet minister of the People's National Movement. And that is why I raised the issue of the recusals. Was it a situation of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours every time they came in and out of the cabinet? But they used these companies, they used their positions to remain in power by political handouts and so on, but not using it effectively to take people out of those destitute positions and giving them something that is more sustainable. And that has always been the strategy of the People's National Movement. When you look at their constituencies, you look at constituencies that have never voted anything else but PNM, Laventille East, Laventille West, Port Spain South, etc. They have always kept those constituencies in a depressed state so that they are able to get the political support without lifting what are usually traditional PNM supporters out of the morass that those and decay that those constituencies exist in. And CPEP was no different. And that is why when we spoke about auditing CPEP, restructuring and reviewing CPEP so that it can come back to its original mandate of being a transitionary program to get people into more sustainable jobs and so on, it is causing them a lot of pain. Because on the eve of a general election, without any cabinet approval, over 360 contracts were renewed for a further period of 3 years. And it begs the question, how can you expend or commit to expend millions of dollars without cabinet approval? And then when we asked the permanent secretary and others in the ministry that it was under former, before it came to public utilities, it was then rural development under Faraz Al-Rawi, we are told that the public servants refused to do any cabinet note, to take that to cabinet on the eve of a general election, and the advice to them was to hold your hand until a general election was completed. But they knew exactly what they were doing because of the fact that they had their own self-interest to preserve and look after, and it was never about the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So, Mikey, in terms of addressing the issues that now fall under public utilities, there must be institutional changes that must come. And I keep making the point, if the people of Trinidad and Tobago were contented with us keeping the status quo, they would have gone out and voted for the People's National Movement on election day.
Agreed.
We have a special majority in the House of Representatives. We didn't just win by 1 seat or 2 seats. We have been given a special majority, a constitutional majority to govern Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, that mandate means that people want real effective changes that will redound to their benefit in terms of service delivery, whether it is water, social development, national security, etc. But it cannot continue to be that you have square pegs and round holes and you're expecting a different result. So a lot of these programs and so on are under review to bring it back to its core mandate, to deliver in the shortest possible time. For instance, at WASA, we have been able to redirect from areas where you had 24/7 supply of water, never a problem in terms of the water pressure. We've been able to redirect some of those areas to go into areas which didn't have water for sometimes a month, 2-3 weeks. And it really requires you to have the political will, because for years I have been complaining in opposition that WASA puts out these water schedules. But when you check your taps, there's no water coming through the taps, even though they tell you on Monday you're getting water. They never kept to those schedules. And I repeatedly raised it as an opposition member. And the then minister would say, well, no, there's a water schedule. But it requires you to have political will. As tedious as it may sound, simple things like water in people's taps mean a lot to them. And therefore, on a daily basis, my phone is inundated with MP, there's no water here. And it's throughout the entire country. But first you have to put yourself in those situations, and representing constituencies in rural communities really gives you a different perspective on life. And in terms of how government treats with those constituencies.
Let me ask you this, Minister, and even back with the People's Partnership, the government led by Kamla Prasad-Visesa has never withheld information as far as always forthcoming with what's taking place, what's developing, what's on the agenda. Do you believe that sometimes this comes across to others, which she has warned that not to take her kindness for weakness, and just trying to be as forthcoming as possible, that many may seem to look for kinks in her armor and try to bully her? Because many people are weighing in on the post-cabinet conferences that there seems to be media personnel who would act in a certain manner which would not be the same with Dr. Rowley, former Prime Minister, as they do now with our current Prime Minister.
Oh, most definitely. We have taken notice of that as well. And I'll give you an instance. On Thursday last, I was asked about an employee of the Salcott being appointed to the board of WASA. And I saw that there was a social media blogger that is associated openly to the People's National Movement. We all know who she is. And she had put out that, and I double-checked. I said, well, we could not have done something like that. And I double-checked. And would you believe that the exact same issue that was put out by that PNM social media blogger came up in the postcard, and they could not tell me because the media tried to put it out as though that it was an issue that was making its rounds, and it was not making its rounds. It just came from that one person, from the PNM social media team. And when I checked, I said, well, no, we could not have made a mistake like that. And when I double-checked, it was a lie. It was a complete fabrication. The person was never even employed at the Salcott. So I understand exactly what you're saying, but the thing about it, I think Mrs. Prasad-Visesa has demonstrated that we have learned from our past experience, and we also know that the elements that continue to support the People's National Movement, whether it's in the media or anywhere else, that they're not just going to roll over and die. So we are very mindful, and if you notice, our approach is respectful but very strong and direct in terms of how we treat with those matters. And you know, I'm very happy as well to also share with you that the government throws its full support behind Mrs. Prasad-Visesa in terms of how she has been handling some of these matters, not pussyfooting around them. Yeah. You would see what she has been speaking about with respect to our national security matters that have been gracing the front pages. And I think the population, for quite a while, they wanted the return of a compassionate leader, which we have in Mrs. Prasad-Visesa, but someone who will tell it as it is. And I think the population, despite the efforts of the PNM social media bloggers and others, the population is truly appreciative of that. That is the sentiment that I'm picking up. The directness in which she's handling it, the forthrightness, but also the courage and strength, and not pussyfooting around the issue. So, you know, I really want to use the 1 or 2 minutes I probably have left to say kudos to the Honorable Prime Minister, because sometimes I just came off the phone with her. That's why it took so long to join your interview. Yeah. But she has a no-nonsense approach, but also she expects that you work 24/7 and you don't expect you will be kind of day off on a Saturday or Sunday, because she understands that there's no honeymoon period and she wants the betterment of the country, and particularly ministers who are in delivery areas of governance. She has mandated us, you know, to start looking at what are the short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And I've shared some of what the long-term are with you, and as well as some of the short-term and medium-term. So yes, we are starting to see progress, but it will come. It's just only been a month. But there are several ministries that have started to deliver. People have already been telling me, you know, they never used to get water, now they're getting water. MD Vandana's ministry, she was able to clear a backlog of over 6,000 applicants who were just languishing under the People's National Movement, waiting for their pensions. She's been able to clear that. The Minister of National Security is out there rallying the troops. So a lot is happening, a lot will happen in the future, but it really requires you to have the political will. And I think after the 10 years that we have stayed in opposition, we are very mindful of the suffering that is out there. sometimes the challenge is that you can't meet the expectations as quickly as they come, but the population has been, really understanding. And I think once we continue to communicate with them and they see that their MPs and their ministers are out there working, they understand that they're in this for the long haul. And as I told you earlier, we have a constitutional majority, and there's so much to be fixed. But I would safely say we started the fixing of it.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for taking time out on this Sunday evening to link with us here and bringing such information. Very insightful. Keep up the good work, and we will be checking with you periodically to get an update as things progress.
Great. It was nice speaking with you.
As always. Thank you.
Take care, Mikey.